Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into something kind of different, We're looking at the Bible, but from a perspective that, you might not have thought about too much before.
Yeah, it's a really fascinating take on some familiar stories.
So we'll be focusing on this question. What if how Jesus is shown in the Bible?
Yeah.
What if his appearance wasn't always as clear-cut as we tend to think?
Exactly. And to do that, we'll be taking a look at a YouTube video that explores the idea that Jesus could maybe shift his appearance or at least kind of veil himself so people wouldn't recognize him.
Right. And we're not talking like a, magical disguise or anything like that, but something deeper, almost like tied to his divinity. You know what I mean?
Right. And before we jump into specific instances, it might be helpful to define what apocryphal texts are, just so everyone's on the same page.
Good point. Yeah.
So these are basically writings that are related to Jesus and the early Christian movement, but they didn't make it into the official Bible.
Okay, so they're like extra stories or something?
Yeah, kind of like alternative perspectives, and they sometimes hint at ideas that aren't fully spelled out in the Gospels that we know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start with maybe the most famous betrayal ever. Judas identifying Jesus with a kiss.
Right.
But you'd think, in a time without photos or social media, Jesus would be pretty easy to pick out of a crowd.
And that's where things get kind of interesting. Why would they need a special signal if Jesus was so recognizable?
I never thought of it like that.
Yeah, the video suggests that this points to a deeper truth. Maybe there is something about Jesus right then that made him harder to recognize.
So not a physical change, but something that messed with people's perception of him.
Exactly. Now let's move on to the resurrection.
Okay.
We have Mary Magdalene at the tomb, just completely overcome with grief, and then she sees Jesus.
Okay.
But she doesn't recognize him. She thinks he's the gardener.
To be fair, if I had just seen, my friend and teacher brutally killed, I might not be thinking straight either.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I mean, grief can do strange things to how you see the world.
Definitely. This scene is more than just a mistaken identity. It brings up a deeper question about what it means to recognize someone, especially after a really traumatic experience.
Could her grief have been a veil that stopped her from seeing clearly?
It's possible. Or maybe there's even more to it.
Okay. And then there's the road to Emmaus, right? 2 disciples are walking with Jesus, talking about the crucifixion, the whole thing.
Yeah.
And they don't recognize him.
Yeah, and it's not until they share a meal together that they suddenly realize who he is.
And then poof, he's gone.
Exactly. These repeated instances of delayed recognition, even after spending so much time with him, that's what makes this concept so intriguing.
The video mentions that their eyes were kept from recognizing him, but it doesn't really explain why.
Right. There are a few different theological interpretations of that phrase.
Okay, like what?
Well, one idea is kenosis, which is the belief that Christ chose to empty himself of some of his divine attributes while he was here on earth. So could that have included making himself less recognizable sometimes? Another interpretation focuses on the disciples themselves. Maybe they just weren't spiritually ready to see him for who he truly was.
So their hearts and minds were too clouded with grief and confusion.
Exactly. They couldn't really perceive him.
So we're not just talking about what they physically saw.
No, it's deeper than that. Think about it. Even the people closest to Jesus struggle to understand his true nature, and this is all before the resurrection when, we usually think of him as fully divine.
Which makes you wonder, was this ability to be unrecognized something he always had, or did it become stronger after the resurrection?
Right. Was it something he did on purpose or just a natural part of being divine?
That's a big question.
It is. And what's really interesting is this concept isn't only in the Gospels. The video mentions that some apocryphal texts, like the Gospel of Thomas, also hint at Jesus being able to appear differently to different people.
Okay, so we've got biblical examples, we've got these theological interpretations, but how does this idea of Jesus, not always being recognized, how does that apply to us now? It can't just be an ancient mystery, can it?
Oh, it's definitely relevant today. Think about all those times when you missed something important because you weren't really paying attention, Maybe you were distracted or stressed or just not expecting anything out of the ordinary.
Like that time I totally blanked on my neighbor's name and I've known them forever.
Right. Exactly. We often get stuck in these fixed ideas of how things should be, how people should act.
So if something doesn't fit those expectations, we might just miss it completely.
It happens all the time. The source material is kind of pushing us to consider this. How often do we miss those little signs, those unexpected moments of grace, just because they don't fit our preconceived notions?
Okay, so let's go back to Judas for a second.
Mm-hmm.
The video pointed out that even before the resurrection, there were hints that, Jesus' appearance wasn't always so straightforward.
Exactly. The fact that Judas had to use a kiss to point him out suggests that there was something unusual about how Jesus was presenting himself even during his ministry.
So almost like his appearance had this kind of fluidity to it.
Yeah, like he could blend in or stand out, depending on what was needed.
It makes you wonder, how many other times did Jesus move among people without being recognized? Like, did he use this ability consciously?
That's a good question. Was it a way to protect himself? Or maybe to test people's faith?
Hold on, are we saying that Jesus was deliberately playing hide and seek with people? Doesn't that go against, the idea of him being this compassionate teacher?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Some scholars actually suggest that Jesus' ability to veil his true nature was an act of love.
Okay, now I gotta hear this. Explain that one.
Okay, so think about it. If Jesus was constantly appearing in all his divine glory, it might have just been too much for people you know. They wouldn't have had the freedom to choose to follow him based on his teachings, his actions, his message.
So by dimming his true nature, he was actually giving people the space to come to him authentically.
Exactly. It allowed for real, genuine encounters based on faith, not on fear or just blind obedience.
Wow, that's a completely different way of looking at it. So if we apply that to our own lives, maybe the challenge isn't to go searching for the divine in some big, obvious way,
but to be more open. To be more attentive to those subtle moments of connection, those little acts of kindness, those glimpses of something bigger at work in the world.
So instead of trying to force a revelation, we should focus on being aware of what's already there.
That's a beautiful way to put it. This deep dive is really prompting us to rethink our assumptions, not just about Jesus, but about how the divine might be working in our own lives.
Okay, so we've covered the biblical examples. We've talked about different interpretations now. Where do we go from here? What does this all mean for us practically?
I think the main takeaway is that we should approach life with a sense of wonder, to recognize that the divine might show up in ways we don't expect.
So basically, don't judge a book by its cover.
Exactly. What if that person you rush past on the street, the one you dismiss as just ordinary, what if they're carrying a spark of the divine? What if that everyday encounter, that seemingly insignificant moment, actually has a deeper meaning?
Oh, that's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. It's like we need to retrain how we see the world.
It's more than just seeing, though. It's about sensing those subtle energies, those moments of connection that go beyond the ordinary.
Okay, but with all this talk about how even people close to Jesus didn't always recognize him, isn't there kind of a danger here? Couldn't someone take this whole idea too far?
How do you mean?
What's to stop someone from just ignoring real problems? Or not taking responsibility for their actions and just saying, oh, well, maybe that's just the divine plan or something.
That's a really important point. And this isn't about creating a spiritual bypass or, pretending everything's perfect. We still have to engage with the world to, fight injustice and work towards making things better.
So it's not about just passively accepting whatever happens and calling it divine will.
Not at all. It's more about having a nuanced perspective, recognizing that even when things are tough, when there's suffering, there might still be something bigger at play.
So those times when something awful happens and then out of nowhere a new opportunity appears or a connection is made or, there's a sudden glimmer of hope.
Exactly. It's about holding on to that possibility that even when things seem dark, the divine might still be there guiding us, supporting us, showing us a way forward.
It makes you think about how we treat each other too. If we're so quick to dismiss the ordinary, to overlook this seemingly small stuff, are we maybe missing chances to connect with the divine and the people around us?
It's a deep question. If Jesus could walk among us unrecognized, how often do we fail to see that same divine spark in, the stranger, the outcast, the person we'd normally just ignore?
That's a powerful thought. It's like we're being asked to widen our definition of what's holy, to see the sacred, not just in churches or grand gestures, but in everyday interactions and simple acts of kindness, in those unexpected moments of grace.
And that brings us right back to the core of this deep dive. How often do we miss the divine in our own lives because we're so focused on appearances, on expectations, on our own limited way of seeing things?
So what can we actually do to cultivate this deeper awareness? Is it about meditation or prayer or spending more time in nature?
Those things can definitely help, but honestly can be much simpler than that. It's really about paying attention, being present in the moment, Noticing the details, looking for those little synchronicities, those unexpected connections that make you wonder if there's something more going on.
Like when you stop to appreciate the beauty of a flower growing through a crack in the sidewalk, or when you feel that wave of gratitude for some random act of kindness.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a sense of wonder, of curiosity, of being open to the possibility that the divine is woven into the very fabric of our lives.
You know, it's like this deep dive is challenging us to be more like Mary Magdalene at the tomb, to keep looking even when we don't get it, to trust that understanding will come when it's meant to.
That's a beautiful way to put it. We might not always recognize the divine right away, but if we stay open, if we keep our hearts and minds tuned in, we might be surprised by where it shows up.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. It's given me a whole new way to see the world and my own, spiritual journey. I'm definitely going to be paying closer attention from now on.
And that's the beauty of exploration, right? It expands our awareness, it challenges our assumptions, and it opens us up to new possibilities. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep your eyes open to the wonders all around you.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's inspired you to look for the divine in unexpected places and to really appreciate the mystery and the wonder that are, at the heart of everything.
Yeah.
Until next time, keep diving deep.